G'day, I'm Garry Pye. In this video, I'd like to introduce you to my new Sketchy Scenes backgrounds. Unlike the DIY backgrounds that I've worked on previously, which have sort of a very flat, vector style, colorful, cartoony quality to them, the Sketchy Scenes are more like 3D renders, photo bashing, large style backgrounds and props, high quality renders that you can customize all your own backgrounds in the same way that we've always done. They just have a lot more edgy, sort of sketchy quality to them that I think works really, really well, not only with 2D animation, but also with things like static images, comics, graphic novels, and motion comics. So I just wanted to take you through a couple of them, show you what they're all about, and also maybe show you how I set them up in Photoshop to create one of my own static images. So let's take a look at that. So here is the Sketchy Scenes basement scene set up in Cartoon Animator 5. This scene will also work for Cartoon Animator 4. All Sketchy Scenes will be set up to work with both 4 and 5. There'll be different ways that I set up the Sketchy Scenes. For instance, this particular pack has a completed scene all set up, ready to go. Other scenes might come with just all the individual elements you need so that you can just create your own pack by moving everything around, mix and matching all the different elements between each other. You'll be able to create all your own scenes. In fact, with a scene like this, if you want to, you can bring in other individual props to the scene as well, which I'll show you. But let's start with a completed, finished scene, in this case, the basement. When you have a look at your scene down the side here, these are all the different layers that make up this scene. Now, although the scene might be just a flat single image, it still has layering in it that will allow you to have your actors move around in the correct perspective. For instance, if you take the elevator doors here, you can turn them off or slide them open to reveal the elevator that's inside. Or you can take away the elevator altogether so that you've just got the elevator shaft and cable on the inside. Okay, so if you bring an actor in, you can bring the doctor forward so that you can have him actually standing inside the elevator. You can turn off to reveal the room in the background, and the door here, you can also turn off to reveal in the background. With these particular doors, if you open your sprite editor, you'll see these doors have two sprites so that you can animate the door opening or just have it partially open. And the same with this door, you can have it. So you get plenty of functionality out of this one scene. Okay, so that's one way you can do it. If you purchase the Sketchy Scenes from my website store, you'll get not only the CT scene file for Cartoon Animator 4 and 5, and you will also get the PSD file, and in some cases PNG files for props. You'll get the PSD file so that you can work with the scenes in Photoshop. And when you work in Photoshop, you can set your scene up with much more detail because you can change all your lighting and texturing and shadows and saturation so that all the individual elements of a scene blend together. And I'll show you now what I mean by that. In Photoshop, taking the basement scene, for instance, let's say we were to introduce a new prop, take something from the basement's prop pack, okay? We'll take a prop from here and we'll add in, say, this barrel. Okay, select it, and we'll drop the barrel over the top of the scene. Now, when you first drop the barrel into the scene, you're going to notice it doesn't necessarily blend very well because, simply put, the colors just don't match. The background has like a yellow tone to it, whereas that's not affecting the barrel. So what we need to do is to change the lighting or the coloring on the barrel just to make it match the scene. And what I do is I would duplicate that layer and then reduce its lightness to 0 so that to start with, we've got a silhouette. select it. Okay, make our edges different so we can see it. Then I would pick a color from the background, that brown, paint the barrel with that, but then start going through all your filters that come with Photoshop until you find a filter that starts to match the drum into the background. See, there, your soft light, for instance, starts to add the lighting to the drum to be a little bit better. The overlay works quite well. I think if we desaturate, the overlay I'm thinking works quite well. If you then desaturate it a bit, now you can see that the drum has the yellowing tones of the rest of the background. But now I've merged those two layers because we'll just rename it so that we can see that that's our barrel. But just for the sake of getting it to blend as well as possible, it's a little too bright. I would tend to darken it down a bit. So again, if you make a second layer of it, but this time hit it with a multiply feature or a darken, or play with your darker features, yeah. Hit it with the multiply feature, right? Perhaps suck some of the saturation out of it so that it will blend a little bit better. Do that with the top layer as well. Suck a little bit of the saturation out of it, okay? And just keep playing around with your filters and your colors so that it will blend better. You can even just select around the outside of it, the barrel, invert that selection, create a new layer. And now I can play with the colors on this layer, because what I would do is I would want to start bringing in a little bit more shadow over the barrel so that the side that is not affected by the light is a little bit more shadowed. Maybe bring that in with a darken. Okay, so now you can see that the barrel blends a little bit better with the background. You could even do one more. Okay, so again, select the background, inverse. Now we've just selected the barrel. Create a new layer, because that's going to affect anything that's over the top of the barrel. Hide our edges, right? Then perhaps just grab that orange from the background and put it over the top and put an overlay on it and reduce it down a bit. And then that way you've got just that hint of the light coming onto the barrel. So you can play around with all your layering like that, but you can add new elements into the existing scenes. So you can mix and match props from the Sketchy series and drop them into existing scenes, or you can start from scratch and build your own scene with some of these packs, and I'll show you that. Okay, here we are in the Sketchy Scenes brick wall pack. This pack has 5 individual walls and 5 individual floors that you can turn off so that you can mix and match all of your floors and backgrounds to get all different looks as a starting point for your background. Okay, but let's, for instance, start with my personal favorite, wall brick 2 and the wooden floor. I love that as a start scene for a background. Okay, we'll flatten that background so that we start off with a basis that we can now build our background onto. Okay, now we have the Sketchy Scenes basement props pack, which has 41 different props that you can use to start creating and building all your own scene. Right? Let's, for instance, add in a wall to begin with. I love this wall. Let's drop this one in. So if we pick a wall and we drop it in, we'll name them as we go in case we get a few of them, okay? So we'll just call that brick wall. Now you'll notice when we drop that in that it doesn't automatically match the coloring of the background, okay? But that doesn't mean it doesn't have to. We can get it to do that. So once that's in, again, the perspective is not quite right either, right? You'll see that the lines on the floor head this way, whereas the brick wall heads that way. Easy enough fixed. If you just select scale and reduce the width of your wall, then it will start to automatically There we go. Automatically fit the base of the floor better. Now the roof doesn't match up properly. That's okay, because you can use your distort tool to distort the shape of the wall perfectly. Now, the problem that we have now is the coloring doesn't match at all, okay? So if we select outside of it, then select inverse, create a new layer over the top of this wall, we can now work on this layer to start playing around with our colors. But if we want to begin with, we can play around with the hue and saturation of the wall that we just dropped in, just to get it to just slightly match our background like that. That's a little bit closer already, okay? Then over the top of this, I'm going to add a color that matches in here from the wall, and maybe do a fade down to this color. So we'll fade from that color to that color. We'll add that in over the top, okay? And then again, play with your filters until such times as you move through one and one will stand out and you'll go, oh, that works. That's a lot closer to the look that you want. The multiply, oh, actually, do we need to check darken? No, doesn't work. The multiply tool filter seems to work quite well there. Okay, now all of a sudden our brick wall matches the background considerably better. And keep in mind, this is just the flat area to start with. Once you add more and more props on there, it's all going to work really well together. But before we do that, to make sure that the final image that we put together has a consistency of color, let's create a layer that we'll just call color, okay? And we'll select a couple of colors from the background that we like. I'm going with the light color, and then I'm also going to go with this more burnt orange sort of look, which I'm going to make a little bit more vibrant. And I'm going to create that entire layer, and then over the top, I'm going to hit the color filter and reduce it down a little bit. And what will happen is all of your colors for all the props that sit underneath this are now going to be affected by that color, and it will all blend in a little bit nicer together. Let's add a few props to this background just to demonstrate how you can build a scene quickly using the Sketchy Scenes basement props. Let's add the stairs in. Okay, select it. Let's drop the stairs in. All you've got to do is just rescale them. These props are huge. You're going to have no problem working with them because they're huge. We'll drop our stairs in. Now, now we've got to make sure we rename it, and we want it underneath the color. See, automatically that color, even though the stairs and the floor don't necessarily blend well together, once you put that little filter over the top, it all starts to blend better. Also, then you can play around with your saturation and decide exactly what color you want this background, but it's going to affect all of the colors at once and just look more authentic. So now we've got our stairs coming down. By the way, I'm not particularly worried about every single angle being accurate. You'll notice that maybe some of the line work here doesn't match up with the floor. If that happens, cover it with a prop, right? Nice and easy. I'm not that fussed. In the end, it's just a matter of if you look at the scene and it looks right, then it looks right. Let's just take the box stack, for instance, okay? What we'll do is we'll add the box stack into the scene to cover up this little area here where the floorboards don't match the line work of the stairs, the angle of the stairs, right? So what we'll do is we'll just add those in there. And what we can do is to use the distort tool to change the angle of the boxes to match the floor like that. Now, the angle of the area looks a lot better. And rename it. So we're slowly starting to build the scene just for the fun of it. I got to tell you, the boar's head, I love this prop. That is such a good looking prop. Let's grab the boar's head. Let's drop it on the wall. Just rescale it. Scroll that head. let's take the boar's head and we'll just rescale it, put it on the wall. Now, essentially, all you've got to do is to keep adding more and more props like this as you go along. I'm going to cut now and just jump forward a little bit where I've added in some more props. Okay, so what I've done here is I've dropped in a couple of other props, but we need to move them around and position them up and do a couple of things with them just to show you what we can do. You'll notice that the dog's head, for instance, the angling doesn't quite work. Now, you might be fine. I don't need all my line work being perfect. I actually really like a lack of symmetry in things. I find it's much more interesting to look at. Personally, I would leave the dog like that. But if you're tedious and fussy and you want to make sure, pedantic, and you want to make sure, if it makes your eye twitch, then you want to make sure that the perspective is right, you can just use the distort tool. That'll fix up the dog. In the background there, you'll see that I've added in the bench and the tools. You can move those around to wherever you want, just again, to make sure that you want them to line up in an area where they look right. Like if you put it there, it just doesn't look right. You've got this light bar coming through the middle of it, doesn't look right. But if I put it over here, right, match it up to the roof like that, that looks a lot more natural. It just blends better. In fact, with the tools, if you were to transform them and flip them horizontally, probably looks even better because now you've got the darker side of it down here, the lighter side of it down there. And if you wanted to, you can use your darken tool, the exposure tool, to even darken it up more as you get towards the back. You're adding in all your own shadows. You start with the props as your basis, but just make them all blend together better. See, now I'm noticing that the head of the boar is, in my opinion, just a little bit big, right? There we go. Looks better once it's down a little bit. Now you'll notice that the chair seems to be just plonked there in the middle of the scene. That's because it's lacking, in my opinion, a shadow on the ground, okay? The shadow, how you draw the shadow, whether you draw it in manually or however you do it, is entirely up to you. What I generally do is to duplicate the chair, reduce its saturation down to 0, keep that at the back of the chair and call it shadow, right? And then just play around with distorting the image until you're happy with it, until you get a shadow shape. Doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing here has to be perfect. In fact, I think it looks so much better if it's not perfect. But let's say we drop our shadow in like that. Move our shadow up a little bit. Just distort it a little bit more so that it comes down to the legs. Like that. And also, if you are playing around with your shadows and it's not what you want, just trim them. Just use your brush tools to trim them. And then when you're done, reduce the opacity down, and you can add in a chair. You can add a soft blur filter to that if you wanted to. But now we've got our scene. Now let's say, for instance, we've set up our basement. This is what we want. All you need to do now is you can just save it, however you want to save it. Now that our scene's finished, we've got two options. You can flatten the scene down, send it into Cartoon Animator. But if you have areas that you need characters to move around and behind, maybe you want to bring your Photoshop file into Cartoon Animator and then you can layer it. So for instance, if we're in Cartoon Animator now and we drag and drop our brick wall in as a scene, the first thing that you're going to notice is that our color layer is a solid color. The best you can do here is to reduce its opacity down to just play around with it between 10 and 20%. That's still going to add that color over the top of your scene. That's going to give you all the right color matching as far as you can, so that when you drop your characters and that in there, they're going to be affected by that color as well. You can play around with the shadows. You'll need to reduce the opacity of the shadows so that they match again. But that scene is pretty accurate if we take that down to about 15%, maybe 10%. Here we go. That scene is pretty accurate to the original scene that we set up in Photoshop. And now it's all layered. So the doctor's Z-axis value is 1.1. The chair overlay is 0, meaning it's behind it. If its value is larger than the doctor's, chair overlay, if it's larger than the doctor's, then he's now sitting in the chair in the correct perspective. And all you need to do is to make sure that your color overlay at the end is the highest Z-axis value. So if we were to make that 50, we know anything that we're going to move around in that scene is going to stay behind it. And now that color also affects the doc when we're in there. Don't forget, you can desaturate the doctor as well to make him fit the scene a little bit more. You could go into your SVG color adjustment settings, and you could take the clothing and make his pants desaturated. It's all things, or his pants. There we go, desaturate his pants. It's all things that you can do that are going to just make that character look like it's more within the scene. But where you get the most power is definitely in Photoshop, because let's say, for instance, we wanted to put together a static scene of the Doctor. If you've got it in Cartoon Animator, you can animate the scene, terrific. But I know a lot of people are now doing comics, graphic novels, static images, artwork, motion comics, things like that. And they want to create their final artwork in Photoshop rather than Cartoon Animator. So say, for instance, we have our Doctor here in this scene. Let's just bring in an image of the Doctor that if we wanted to put him into this scene. Okay, oops. We'll find the Doctor, 2Ds, Doctor, go to the poses, and let's say, for instance, we just wanted to, I love this pose of the Doctor. If we just drop him into the scene, okay, rescale him, put him in front of the chair naturally, there we go. Now, because we've got our color overlay, the doc blends quite nicely into the scene. However, I'll just call him Doc. However, I do generally like to still add a little bit of extra lighting to my actors when I put them in the scene if it's a static shot, because again, it just blends them into the scene that little bit better. So what I would do is to duplicate the Doctor, make his lightness 0, select that, okay? Now I would maybe choose an area around about here that is the shadow of the scene, okay? And then create a new layer. Let's get rid of our edges. Create a new layer. And with a brush, we can then paint a rough shadow that we want over the Doctor there. That will just give him a nice curve, nice shadow. And if we hit that with the multiply tool and then reduce it and make it a little more subtle, you see what I mean? It's just stopped him from being flat and now just blends him into the scene a little bit more. So you can then go to the trouble of adding a shadow to him as well. You can add lots of different things that are just going to create an overall scene that works really well. So there you have it. That's how easy the sketchy scenes are to work with. Whether you're starting with a completed scene and you just drag and drop your characters into the scene and animate it in Cartoon Animator 4 or 5, you can do that. Or in Photoshop, you can break it all down to the basics and build your scene the way you want to build it and have total control over your scenes. Thanks for watching. See you for the next one. Bye-bye.